wish to welcome everyone to this, the third edition of the Great Debate Series, a big name we have given this event, organized by the InterVarsity Christian Fellowship here on the St. Augustine campus. I wish to specifically recognize the presence of the Vice Principal of the St. Augustine campus, Professor Rhoda Reddock. Thank you very much for being here. She ought to be somewhere in the audience. This evening's proceedings will focus on the purpose of life. This subject results from the perception that almost everyone, everywhere, would have at some time in their youth or adult lives meaningfully posed the question either to themselves or to someone else. It will be that such an investigation is of questionable value. In a world which is very much focused on immediate functional transactions, including the need to remain fed, watered, clothed, safe, well, and alive. Or it can conceivably have relevance in the pursuit of conditions of happiness, contentment, joy, love, perhaps some fun, and the like. Whatever its value, the question appears to be with us, and we have the option of dealing with it. This evening, we have decided to attempt to come to terms with it, at least to grasp some of the basic concepts that need to be grasped if we need to address such a question. To help us do so this evening is a panel of distinguished persons. Dr. Ramesh Richard is a spiritual philosopher and theology professor, and he's seated right here to my immediate right. Imam Mirza Ali Muhammad is an imam and training consultant. Mrs. Kamla Tiwari is coordinating member of Women of Faith and the Network of Religions for Peace. And Mr. Kevin Baldeo Singh is chairman of the Trinidad and Tobago Humanist Association, an author and a journalist. Through a process of autocratic pre-selection, the speaking order has been determined by me. And our first discussant will be Dr. Ramesh Richard. Dr. Richard comes to us via the Dallas Theological Seminary. He's the founder and president of a global proclamation organization, reaching leaders worldwide, especially those of Asia, Africa, and Latin America. He's an inspirational speaker, a spiritual philosopher, an educator, and a practical author who speaks on the ultimate issues of life to tens of thousands of people around the globe each year. From Harvard to Haiti, the press release says, from presidents of nations to the masses in them, from small intimate gatherings to large filled arenas, he has clarified the message of peace and hope to wide-ranging audiences in over 80 countries. I now give you Dr. Ramesh Richard. Dr. Richard.
Since I'm in a unique situation here this evening, in a mix between the West and the East, I have started using a line which goes like this. In the West, we start a speech with a joke. In the East, we start a speech with an apology. I right away want to say I apologize for not having a joke. I have grown up watching your cricket teams since I was a little boy in India, and some of your greats were my heroes. And of course, the most recent ones, I am told that President Obama called him the Michael Jordan of cricket, and I beg to let him know that he's probably the Brian Lara of basketball in the U.S. TNT, I did not know how it was fully spelled, and so I thought it really was a microcosm of an explosion, talking about the strength of how explosives are measured. And when Brian Lara played, there was some explosion, of course. But a debate is not a limited over-day cricket. It is more like a test match. And the reason for debates are for understanding rather than for victory, for progress, and mutual respect. I do know that you have a clause inside your national anthem about every creed and every race finding equal place and space with God's blessing on the nation and so on. And so you're in a unique situation to be with us and my esteemed panelists in terms of traditions and convictions. And I'm grateful for the privilege of representing one particular view and making a case for it, and also a recommendation by the time that we are done. The first two debates, I got a chance to watch the first one. I did not get a chance to watch the last one. I'm very, very glad that you went from a two-person debate format to a four-person presentation format and discussion. Because in a two-person debate, which is often how debates are formulated, is stating a proposition, people take for and against positions, and possibly some voting banks. Often what those two-person presentations fall into is what is called the fallacy of the excluded middle, as though, Christianity is on one side and atheism is on the other side, with no hues and shades in between. And so to have four of us here allows us to make some presentations for you to consider for your personal life as well as thought. I'm approaching this particular question in a way that is possibly the approach that is appropriate to the question. The first two questions about the existence of God and life after death may have had some scientific and historical undergirding. This one is purely philosophical, and all of them, of course, are theological. And I come to you, as our moderator introduced me, as a spiritual philosopher. Somebody defined a philosopher as a blind man in a dark room looking for a black cat that is not there. And a theologian helps him find the black cat that is not there. In a university setting like this, you will probably understand what they said at the University of Delhi, where I was. They said, when you go to the physics lab, don't look at anything. When you go to the chemistry lab, don't smell anything. When you go to the medical lab, don't touch anything. Of course, when you go to the philosophy department, don't listen to anything. All of you know the two laws of philosophy. The first law is for every philosopher there's an equal and opposite philosopher. And the second law of philosophy is both of them are wrong. So we are addressing this in a very specific way, and I'm grateful for this question. It's a question that has passed everybody's mind and heart at some time in their lives. Maybe you were young, and now you're old, and the question still lingers on. But the way we define the question assumes some things and addresses something. So in fact, the question of why in the world we are here, every part of that question is loaded. And depending on the traditions and convictions we come to, even the questions that we ask towards the questions may be hard to grasp. For example, the word why. Why in the world? The word why assumes some undergirding, some premises, some presuppositions on which you build the answer to the question. The word why actually has dual purpose, both of rational justification as well as personal purpose. Why in the world are? That is sort of a time matter. The time issue is important. That means there was a where and there will be something. Now in philosophy we have huge questions about the issues. I have heard of the grammar teacher who asked her class to start a sentence with I, and a student said, I is, and immediately she jumped and said, no, you always have the word am after the letter I. And so he said, I am the 9th letter of the English alphabet. In terms of naturalism, especially radical naturalism, there is what we call the continuity of phenomena, assuming things of the past which is not scientifically premised or proven, it has to be premised rather than proven, the present and some observability of external reality, which is what you are. In fact, there are big questions about identity. Why are we? Who's the we? You, me, we together? Those two are issues. I'm told that when Christopher Columbus found this wonderful part of the world in 1498, he was really looking for India, my motherland. And instead he found this part of the world and called them Indians. One of your own was telling me this morning that there's sometimes confusion, because you're West Indians who have East Indians sitting inside a country which Columbus thought was India. I had an Amerindian once tell me, I'm really fortunate. I said, what do you mean? He said, I'm grateful that Columbus was looking for India and he called us Indians. I'm glad he wasn't looking for Turkey. He'd have called us something else. But this is what they said. When Columbus began, he did not know where he was going. When he got there, he did not know where he was. And when he returned, he didn't know where he had been. And all of it he did on other people's money. Twice, Queen Isabella's money. That sounds like college students to me right now, but that's an entirely different story. Why are we? The identity question. There are actually three aspects in the identity question. The issue of persistence. Are you the same person today as you were yesterday and will be tomorrow? The question of evidence. Who is really who? The question of personhood. What is a person? There's all sorts of discussion in philosophy as to whether you're a thing, you're a part of a thing, you're a part of an observable or an illusory reality. So why are we? In the world are we? The word here also carries huge baggage because it assumes observable external reality which cannot be historically or naturalistically proven. It has to be assumed in order to continue with the enterprise. For example, the word here says there's history and geography, both of them present. History and geography, April 2011, and in Port of Spain. When the committee was meeting, asking me to come here, they actually asked me to come last year, and I could not. The question of why in the world are we here, I said, why don't we have an alternate question instead? Why aren't you dead yet? And that is actually the counterfactual of the question, why aren't you dead yet? And then the committee thought the word, why aren't you dead yet, maybe too criminally minded for a very healthy, soft debate like this. As you know, this morning, there was a horrendous tragedy in Jamaica, where Detective Corporal Wayne Llewellyn killed 4 people and himself at the end of it, and his wife is now in critical condition. On March 1st, on March 26th, in his Facebook entry, he had written something about his heart, saying there's no room in his heart for anything else. March 28th, he changed his relationship status from married to complicated. April 1st, he said no longer complicated. And this morning, he killed a few. And so we're not going to talk about why you're not dead yet, because if you're here, it's a safe assumption that you're not yet dead. But we could address it in terms of boredom rates. There are many here who are attending because they're simply bored with life. Life is simply the mundane matters going on every day. So why in the world are we here? But don't forget the question mark at the end. Because it's better, as Joseph Joubert, the French philosopher, moral philosopher, said, to debate a question and not settle it than to settle a question and not debate it. So I'm here with my fellow panelists to make a presentation. At the end, I make a case and a recommendation for you. There are some broad general commonalities with each of my fellow panelists. With the atheist worldview, I hold that there is a possibility of personal meaning. With the Hinduistic worldview, I hold that there is personal consequence. With the Islamic worldview, I hold there's a transcendent, external, objective source of purpose and meaning. But there's also deep, distinctive discontinuities between these worldviews as well. With the atheistic worldview, there is no rational justification from an evolutionary model for purpose. With the Hinduistic worldview, there is no moral justification of why right is right and why wrong might be wrong. And with an Islamic worldview is what I'm going to call the personal justification of personal purpose. Now, each of these have justifications in their own way, but I don't think they're necessary conditions for personal purpose in any of the other worldviews. And the important word is necessary conditions. They have sufficient conditions. So if you want a purpose to live for, a pattern to live by, and a power to live in, there is possibly a typology, what I call, of a threefold typology of purpose. And let me go through them very quickly. I've been given 20 minutes, and I'm grateful for these. The first part of the typology of purpose is what we call the no sense of purpose, no source of meaning. No sense of purpose, no source of meaning. Consistently pushed to its position, the atheistic worldview does not have rational justification except that particular statement. In fact, we have conversations between philosophers inside them who blame each other for not being radical enough. For example, in a recent book called A Wicked Company, written out by Philip Blom, talks about a very special time in 18th century French philosophy of a man by the name of Baron d'Holbach and his company, which was wicked, Denis Diderot. And basically, Baron d'Holbach said, we are radical atheists. We are not soft atheists like Rousseau and Voltaire, like today's atheists are. We are radical atheists. That means there's no moral consequence or difference between heterosexuality and homosexuality. Anymore, there's a moral consequence between oranges and apples. And as you push them, we have what we call nihilists and existentialists who pursue despair as the only way, the four words of birth, school, work, death. What may be called the absurdists, saying there's no real meaning to the question of meaning, and what may be called the positivists, who says there is no point in asking the question at all. You may have heard of the father who told his son, I really want you to study, son. And the son said, why study? The father said, so that you can graduate. And the son said, why should I graduate? And the father said, so you can get a job. The son said, why get a job? The father said, so you can earn some money. And the son said, why should I get some money? And the father said, so you can get a spouse. And so why should I get a spouse? He said, if you get a spouse, you can get a mouse or two or a house, and you continue. And then he said, why should I get a spouse, house, mouse, two? To the father, and the father said, so that one day you can retire just like me. And the son said, I don't want to wait 40 years to retire, I've already retired. Now, the instinctivist would say, why do you get a house, spouse, job, graduate? It's because of the need for sex. The reality of the attraction of the opposite sex. That's the only reason for it. Now, these are all falling into the first typology, no source of purpose, meaning no sense of purpose. Actually, Baron Holbach said, there is no idealism that is good. Humanity should not be working after big ideas, which is simply muddled through. No sense of purpose, muddling through. No source of meaning, muddling through. Now, I don't think any of our panelists feel that way or hold that position, but consistently driven from the first position, when there's no rational justification of purpose, is possible from an evolutionary model that would be consistent. The second typology of purpose I'm going to call human locus of meaning, human source of meaning, human sense of purpose, whereby we create purposes. We borrow, actually, premises from the theists among us, and we create purposes. Small purposes and large purposes. In the history of humanity, there have been the best among humans who said happiness is the purpose of life. For example, Aristotle and eudaimonia, which is not just well-feeling, but well-being. Or hedonism, which is the extremes of pleasure, or pleasurism, which is Epicureanism, which said is the absence of pain in the body and trouble in the soul. Or virtue, the need for doing good, or duty, the need for fulfilling duty. Knowledge, the attainment of knowledge, or the Stoicism, the ability to tune in to the universal logos. And we can continue on with several options. Liberalism, for example, and the pursuit of happiness and liberty and equality. That is, we are the source of meaning, and we can have a sense of purpose. So, that is the second option. The third option, finally, in the second option, you actually have the problem of what may be called morality. Why should the Rwandans have a problem between Hutus and Tutsis and not kill each other? Because there's no moral justification. If we create our own purpose, we are subjectively satisfying. The third typology is that there is divine purpose, there is divine source of meaning and divine purpose. That there is transcendence in the situation. Anytime you create your own purpose, you will not be able to fulfill it. So here we go with the Christian view of purpose. It carries the transcendence of Islam and the immanence of Hinduism. It is both objective and outside and subjective in satisfaction. It is both global in its welcome so that anybody may come, and local in its application to the Trinidad and Tobago situation. It has corporate belonging, that everybody can belong to a community, but there's individual decision. You're free. The only option which says you're free to choose. God gives you freedom to choose. It is also prescribed, but also given grace. So you'll have a purpose to live by, a pattern to live by, and a power to live by. I would like to recommend it to you because God did not stay in his heavens. He came down because he was great enough, had the metaphysical freedom to come in to rescue you from the human situation of hopelessness and boredom in the Lord Jesus Christ. And he says, I will not pontificate from heaven, I will come and give you, meaning you received me so you can enjoy a personal relationship with God who defines, nurtures, and empowers a purposeful life. You can have a pattern to live by, a purpose to live for, and a power to live in. Ladies and gentlemen, that is the Christian view of purpose.
Thank you very much, Dr. Richard. Mirza Ali Muhammad is the Imam of the Bamboo Mosque in Valsain. He's a consultant in training and development and human resource management, who is also a television host on the Islamic Broadcasting Network, IBN TV8. Imam Ali Muhammad is also an assistant chief examiner with CXC for religious education for the Caribbean. I bring you Imam Ali Muhammad.
Good. Thank you very much, Wesley. Can you hear me? If I stand here? Good. Good afternoon, everyone. For those who are Muslims, Assalamu alaikum. I don't have the luxury of 20 minutes, I have 15 minutes. Foreigners get 20 minutes. I'm a local. In preparing, I decided to do some reading of some of the other worldviews. And I thought I'll share one with you to start. It says that you and me, all of us, we are in fact lucky. We are lucky victims of an explosion that took place millions of years ago. And check this out, an explosion that happened out of nowhere. So we are here because of that, and we are waiting here because another explosion is about to happen sometime, and who knows what will happen then. And in fact, some people believe that, and we respect that. So I think today is really more of respect, tolerance, and not necessarily any proselytization. The purpose of life, the Islamic view, for the few minutes, I have 14 minutes now. I'm going to share with you a couple of slides dealing with the spread of Islam. Then I'm going to come to why are we here. And then I'm going to share one fact coming from the Quran. So, start with a landmark study. Nearly 1 in 4 people is a Muslim. You can in fact Google that, don't even listen to me. Google it, 1 in every 4 people is a Muslim. You will find this coming on CNN, on BBC, and actually I took this quote from the ChristianPost.com because the same article is all over the world. It's on every single major network, and it says nearly one out of every 4 people in the world is Muslim today, according to the results of a comprehensive demographic study of more than 200 countries. And this is in fact done in 2009. Done in 2009 by an organization called the Pew Research Center. There's a forum called the Forum on Religion and Public Life, and they said that the number of Muslims today in the world, in fact, stands at 1.57 billion. It shattered all of the views and all of the statistics they had before 2009. For they thought it was 1 in 5, 1 in 6. 2009, October, it hit the world, and it says now, literally, numerically, 1 in every 4 people in the world is in fact a Muslim, and it continues to spread. What you're seeing there is in fact some Muslims from Xinjiang in China. Probably scrunching to grow some beard, but Muslim still. There's another article that took place in 2006. And this occurred, I didn't even attempt to pronounce the Latin or the French name of the newspaper, so I'm going to stay with English. It says that the world has a greater number of Muslims than Roman Catholics today. Roman Catholics, not Christians. And I took this straight out of the world's largest Catholic network called Christian.com. I could have gotten it anywhere else, but I took it out of their newspaper, and you can go and check it on your own. A Vatican official said that for the first time in 2006, the world's Muslim population is greater than Roman Catholics. And Monsignor Formenti is the man, this is the quote here, he says, for the first time in history, we're no longer at the top. The Muslims have surpassed us numerically. I said only Roman Catholics, but Christians altogether still amount to much more. Why am I telling you all of this? Well, the figures actually stood at Catholics 17.4% then, and Muslims 19.2% for the first time in the history of humankind. But why am I telling you all this stuff? To talk about the purpose of life. Why is it people are responding to a religion when every single day we hear in the newspaper that Islam is oppressing its women? Why is it people are responding to this thing when it is we see all of the negatives and all of the things that take place in the Middle East? Why are people responding to this way of life? And I'm saying, I suspect strongly that it's because maybe they found answers to the questions, what is the purpose of life? And maybe, why are we really here? Just maybe. So I'm going to share what the Islamic perspective is. Or whatever person's objective in life or his purpose is to become wealthy. His purpose or her purpose is to become wealthy. That's the purpose, isn't it? I want to become wealthy. Anybody doesn't want to become wealthy? You're lying. That's not true. I want to become wealthy. But what if that's my purpose, the end and be it all? And in fact, that person becomes wealthy. What is the purpose thereafter? What happens after? What if you have achieved the house, you have achieved what you think you should have achieved in life? What is the purpose thereafter? And that is in fact what we're talking about today in the panel, the higher purpose. So the purpose of life as understood by Muslims can be simply stated in 2 words, just simply 2 words, and obey God. And I'm taking this straight out of the text because as a Muslim, we have to reference it to our authority, and the authority is in fact the Quran, revealed to a man whom the Encyclopedia Britannica calls the most successful of all religious personalities. And the Quran tells us, Allah says in the Quran, Inni ja'ilun fil ardi khalifa, that He has created us, He has placed us here for a purpose. And I'll talk about that just now, but our purpose in this life is in fact to obey God. This is assuming that many of us believe there is a God. There's a verse of the Quran that says that it teaches us that even before the creation of humans, that God in fact had a plan for civilization on the earth. So I'm one of those who believe that I'm not one of those little debris that was in fact flying around 4-point-something million years ago, and I happen to be standing here in front of you now. So I'm one of those who don't accept that particular position. There's another verse of the Quran where God says that we are what is called human beings, that is, not Muslim, human beings is a khalifa. A khalifa means a representative, a representative, a vicegerent, a trustee on the face of the earth. Because I just told you what we believe in terms of creation. And our responsibility is in fact nothing else but worship. But worship does not mean staying in the mosque for the whole day. Worship doesn't mean praying for the entire day. Worship doesn't mean pulling some beads for the whole day. Worship for the Muslim is not only engaging in formal rituals, but it is any activity in accordance with the will of Allah, God Almighty, Allah being the Arabic for God, for the benefit of oneself, I put in red, and humanity. Because the Muslim believes if it is we are here and we in fact influence or impact upon the environment positively, it is considered for the Muslim a part of worship. If it is people's lives are touched and the lives become better as a result of that, the socio-economic position is lifted, then that is a form of worship. Therefore, part of our worship is to make the place that we are in better than how we met it. So when we leave, families, lives, environment should be better, and worship encompasses all of that. Thus, the Muslim views the earth, the resources of the earth, its ecology as a gift from God to humans to harness and use for the fulfillment of the trust which is the Khalifa, of the trust which we accepted or which He placed on us, and for which we believe that everyone will in fact be responsible. So much so that a Muslim view, and I might say that it is in fact the view of what we consider to be the monotheistic religions, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, slight differences, but fundamentally believe in the day of judgment, belief in the hereafter exists. And Islam believes in that as well, that there is in fact life in this world. And life starts from conception, and there is a continuum that takes place, and it doesn't end with death. It is just punctuated by birth and punctuated by death, but there's a continuum that goes on, and there's going to be some abode we're going to go into life hereafter, forever and ever and ever. Life in this world, we will die, and there's a transitional period to move into something in the hereafter. Something, whatever we call it, and as far as Islam is concerned, we call it the akhirah, or the hereafter, the afterlife, and there's going to be one of two places, a place for people who live their life in this world good according to the laws prescribed by God, and then there's going to be another place that is ignominy and gloom for people who did not. And why? Because we feel God sent messengers to be able to bring to us what in fact is right. So, life in this world is a test and a trial for us, and in the hereafter, reward and punishment based on how we live our lives here. And therefore, this is why for the maths people, we knew we coined the phrase, y is equal to f of x, where y is in fact our status in the hereafter, and x is in fact our life in this world. So I'm saying by y is equal to f of x, that what happens to us in the hereafter will be largely determined by what we do here in this earth. Or what we do here will in fact determine what takes place with us in the afterlife. If you don't remember anything else, remember y is equal to f of x. And I decided to put this in for my last couple of slides. You see, I was reading the papers this morning, and I happened to see someone, I think he might be the chairman of the Humanist Association, writing an article. And yeah, I think so. Good friend of mine. And he was in fact writing something, and maybe a little bit satirical, and talked about religion in schools and says, if it is you have to be able to teach religion in schools, well, then you probably have to teach this. And he says something from the Quran and the Bible and the Bhagavad Gita and shows some, not mathematics, but mathematics. Didn't make any sense. And that's his view. But in truth and in fact, I mentioned Quran as a reference source, and I thought I'll just share one with you as I end. So don't give me no messages, I'm ending now. Dr. Keith Moore, still alive, professor of anatomy, University of Toronto in Canada. Actually, I have a copy of the book here. Statements referring to human production and development are scattered throughout the Quran. It is only recently that the scientific meaning of some of these verses have been appreciated fully. Dr. Moore, together with Dr. Persad, and Dr. Persad's name is on textbooks that are used in our university here, in our medical school, and in other parts of the world. Dr. Persad is an author of 22 books. Dr. Keith Moore and Persad and other people, they came together and they wrote this book called Human Embryology in the Quran, almost accurate description to modern science. And he's not even Muslim. Not even Muslim. And he did this. So, this is, I'm not going to read all this. This is Dr. Persad and his CV. 22 books, professor of anatomy, etc., etc., etc. But when they looked at what the Quran had, in terms of the exact references and related it to modern embryology, Dr. Persad, and I'm going to read this one for you, he said, I'm a professor of anatomy. The way in which it was explained to me is that Muhammad was a very ordinary man. In fact, he was illiterate, and we're talking about it was actually 1400 years ago. You have someone not schooled in sciences making profound statements that are amazingly accurate about scientific nature, and I personally can't see how this could be a mere chance. There are too many accuracies, and like Dr. Moore, I have no difficulty in my mind that this could not have come from a man in a desert, but it is a divine inspiration or revelation which led him to these particular statements. So the purpose of life, my dear friends, is really a life of purpose. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you very much, Imam. I now want to introduce to you Mrs. Kamla Tiwari, who is a retired secondary school teacher of foreign languages. She holds a postgraduate diploma in HR management from the Arthur Lockjack Graduate School of Business, where subsequently she became a senior associate and managed national and regional projects for the organization. Between the years 2003 and 2007, she served as the president of the Hindu Women's Organization when she was invited to join the World Conference of Religions for Peace. And she's currently a member of the coordinating committee of the Women of Faith Network for Latin America and the Caribbean. Mrs. Kamla Tiwari.
This evening, a pleasant good evening, and I thank you for this opportunity to share my thoughts with you. When I first received communication from the organizers of this forum, I was asked if I would participate in a discussion as to why we are here. I agreed because at every step and every decade that I have lived here on earth, I asked myself that same question. And I don't think I've been able to come up with a clear answer thus far. Nothing that has been satisfactory to me. So in all honesty, I agreed to participate, hoping that in my preparations for this evening discussion, I might find the answer. I know now that that's not going to happen in a firm or unequivocal way. Because although I think that as a human being I have defined my goals with relative clarity, I know that the paths to achieving them change as circumstances in my life change. As communication proceeded between presenters and organizers, I observed that the topic was intensified, for it now read, "Why in the world are we here?" Which suggests to me that the organizers felt there's an urgent need for answers among those of us who are searching for a purpose to life and living. Why suggests to me that we are looking for philosophical answers rather than scientific conclusions. I was once privileged to attend a lecture by the Jewish-American novel Chaim Potok, in which he described philosophical questions such as these as the 4 o'clock in the morning questions. The questions which persist between sleep, dream, and quiet, wakeful consciousness. In an attempt to shed some light on this topic, I will separate religion from spirituality, as I firmly believe that we can be spiritual without belonging to any prescribed religion. It is also my belief that as much as religion sustains many people, it has also been the cause of too much strife over much of our history in the world. I share with you here my modest definition of religion as a system of belief, which prescribe truths which are meant to provide guidance for living and for human conduct. My simple definition of spirituality is the search for a connection with something bigger than us in the universe to help us to define our purpose and to give meaning to life. I was born to Hindu parents and have been brought up in a Hindu home and community. As children, we were involved in everything domestic, religious, and social, and never asked too many questions. As we grew up, there was never time for questions, which had started to pop up amidst the myriad activities that needed attention in a very, very extended family, headed by a widowed matriarch whose goal was to educate her 7 sons single-handedly by dint of astute financial management and property investment to escape from poverty. My siblings and I were grandchildren among many other grandchildren in that household of what is referred to as the Maharaj clan. Attended a Presbyterian high school in San Fernando and making friends from different religious persuasions and ethnic backgrounds was an easy transition for me. Due to the confidence and self-esteem instilled in me at home, the strength and sense of security of the community in which I grew up, and the way of life that my parents pursued. My father, whose mentor was his Presbyterian uncle-in-law, served as an elder in the Presbyterian church, even though he was a pundit. He also had a cross with Christ on the altar and would perform arati to Jesus Christ every morning. He and my mother were active social workers, despite the fact that they hadn't received a formal education, even at primary level. Their mission was to educate others with morals and values that were grounded in Hinduism, but the thrust of their involvement in the lives of others was humanitarian in nature. They just tried to help whenever help was called for. Having grown up in a home where rituals and traditions were unquestionable facts of life, savor or service was the end to those means. So much was done in the name of God, and so much more was given in the name of God. My parents lived by the motto, service to man is service to God. In our household, my brothers and sisters must have heard that motto 1,000 times. So you might say that while the rituals of Hinduism, the pujas, the Ramayana yagnas, the Bhagavad Puran yagnas, were taken for granted as a normal part of our existence, what stayed with me as the essential word, so to speak, was the idea of a life of service and making a difference in the lives of those human beings in need. But life is a journey, and I want to share with you a glimpse into my own journey as a Hindu. I have leaned more towards spirituality than to ritual and orthodox belief to chart my course. Hinduism allows me the freedom to choose how I connect with God, with that divine force that guides my life. And I would have to admit here that I do believe in a divine force, and I do believe that that force can be tapped, can be drawn upon for guidance. How this happens, I cannot explain, but I can admit that I have faith. I have faith that tapping into this source and drawing on its force for guidance can give me strength in times of adversity, hope in times of pessimism, and new ways of seeing things when they become blurred. As a Hindu, I can relate to God as my mother, my father, my child, or my friend, and keep this God of comfort and generosity close to me in prayer. One of the main prayers that every Hindu recites is Tvameva Mata Chapita Tvameva, O God, you are my mother and my father. Tvameva Bandhu Jasaka Tvameva, you are my friend and you are my companion. Tvameva Vidya Dravinang Tvameva, thou art my knowledge and my wealth. Tvameva Sarva Mama Deva Deva, thou art everything to me, O God of gods. To be able to turn to God as a spiritual presence in the universe and as a source of strength and comfort to me, I have to admit is an important part of my existence, an important force in helping me to chart a pathway to living, and an important justification for the reason for my existence and the meaning of my life. If I lost the sense that there was a divine presence in the universe, and that as a human being I was personally connected with that divine presence, I think it would create a great spiritual void in my life and be a great source of trauma for me. And I must say that this thinking on my part is deeply rooted in the Hindu belief that the original source and force is divine, and all life in the universe is connected to the divine, has an element of divinity and connection with that divinity built into the DNA. And that this connection can be heightened or diminished depends on one's disposition and level of consciousness. I would not say that what I have just said is a final answer to any question. And I must confess that I have many questions for which I have not found an acceptable answer. But as Dr. Deepak Chopra puts it, if you meet someone who has all the answers, then head in the other direction. I have never been a student of theology either, but Hinduism and its teachings are an important part of who I am as a human being and how I think of life and the world. In other words, it has influenced my worldview. Let me therefore share with you some of the truths of Hinduism which I have absorbed and which have provided me with guidance so far. I can only determine my purpose in the context of how I see the world and how I engage it. I have been guided by the basic teaching of the Bhagavad Gita, which says, fight the battle of life. Let the virtue in us vanquish the vice. Let any useful work that falls to our lot give us enough opportunity for self-discipline, emulation, and emancipation. The divinity within us is an ever available guide. Attuning ourselves to it, do our job as splendidly as we can. Everyone is obliged to wage the war of what to do and what not to do in and through his own life. The Bhagavad Gita, which is a discourse on the science of self-perfection, also teaches us that the goal of every human life is to transcend body consciousness and attain supreme consciousness. It is the spirit functioning through matter that brings forth the expression of an individual who lives his or her experiences in the world. As you may discern from this, one has choice, and the level of one's consciousness as a human being determines the kind of choices that one makes. The Ramayana, another guiding text in Hinduism on human conduct, gives us a sense of what levels of consciousness mean through the words of Hanuman. When I think of myself as a body, I am a servant of God. When I think of myself as an individual soul, I am part of God. When I become a self-realized soul, you, God, and I become one. The Hindu scriptures prescribe 4 ends to which we should aspire as human beings. Number 1, dharma, the law of being, that which makes a thing or a being what it is. And within this framework, there are a few points of guidance: righteous or unrighteous choices, which allows us to build good or bad karma. To live a dharmic life, one should perfect the 4 tenets espoused in Sanatana Dharma. The first one, satyam, truth. To thine own self be true, we know that quotation from Shakespeare. And this truth has to do with conscience and a sense of what is right and wrong. Secondly, saucham, cleanliness. Cleanliness of body and cleanliness of mind. Daya, which is compassion for others. Dan, which is a charity of both material things and charity of spirit. So if we were to achieve a dharmic way of life, we'd have to satisfy those 4 conditions. Secondly, earth, wealth creation. The idea here is that we must leave more than we met when we came. For others to enjoy during our lifetime, we must create value rather than diminish it. Number 3, calm, disciplined behavior in the pleasing of the senses. And moksha, which is the liberation from the cycle of birth and death. Because reincarnation is an important part of the cycle of perpetual life and the perpetual creation and recreation according to Hindu belief. Thus, the ultimate goal of life, of marriage, of human relations is spiritual evolution to higher levels of consciousness, to intensify one's connection with the original divine source and force in the universe. From this perspective, the human being is a soul in a body and not a body in a soul. A body with a soul, sorry. All of these ideas and perspectives deriving out of Hinduism have helped to shape the way I think about human existence and ultimately the way of life that I engage in. I have made a choice not to follow any dogma. But this all takes me to determining why we are here, why I am here, and why in the world are we here. Our choices are as follows. I'll go with the slides now because my time is almost up and I couldn't talk through those. But I'll just do 1 to recognize our connection with a divine source. 2, to choose to do good or bad. 3, to choose to contribute or to diminish or to destroy. 4, to give service to humanity, to uplift mankind. 2, build a home and family, communities and societal institutions, and foster good relationships. We are here to live lives of truth and virtue, or to live a life of self-delusion and wastefulness. 7, we're here to grow in consciousness, and by growing, evolve as human beings. There are lots of tensions in each of our lives, morning, evening, when something happens, how we deal with it. But that is, I think, proof that we are alive. And the quest that we have the quest for meaning is really the most important thing. Perhaps sincere questions are more important than firm answers. And as I conclude, I want to say that when I die, I hope that others weep, but I should depart this world with a smile, knowing that I've done my very best. We have to live every day with the end in mind, and that will determine the journey that we undertake if we think we know what the end is going to be. I thank you for this opportunity to share.
Kamla Tiwari. We're going to move quickly along now, especially since we're going to deduct some of the minutes from Kevin's presentation to compensate for the others who went over. Just joking, Kevin. Kevin Baldev Singh is a newspaper writer and novelist who deals with a wide range of social, cultural, and political issues. In 20 years as a professional writer, He has written over 2,000 newspaper articles, over 30 periodical articles and papers, 20-plus short stories, 3 novels, and a history textbook. He's a co-founder and chairman of the Trinidad and Tobago Humanist Association, presumably the same one who had a column in today's newspaper, the only organization of its kind in the Anglophone Caribbean. Kevin Baldeo Singh.
Let me just find my, take every technology. Dr. Shirley, I don't know what you renamed my file.
She renamed the file, Thank You, Jesus.
No wonder I can't find it. Ah, there it is. I got it. Yeah. Good. Good evening, everyone. What is the purpose of life? The answer is actually quite simple. The purpose of life is to eat and to have sex, not necessarily in that order. Oh, I'm aware of it. So the basic drives of all organisms, including humans: survival, eating; reproduction, what I just said; sometimes for many people, TV, because we spend so much of our lives with that. And these are the drives that we evolved as humans 100, 150,000 years ago, modern humans, even before that, as our ancestors evolved. And the basic drives that shape our lives and our motivations and so on are not so different in modern society. Food and sex are still connected. We find in less complex societies that the best hunter is often the individual who has the most mates, the most children, and so on. So we see a connection there between providing food, getting food, and reproduction. And even in modern society, when a man carries a woman out for an expensive dinner, he often feels a bit miffed if he doesn't get some recompense after. And in certain strata of society, I understand, even a 2-piece with fries will do. Now, the strategies that our ancestors used to survive and reproduce are what shapes our brains today. We have Stone Age brains and Space Age skulls, as evolutionary psychologists put it, meaning that whatever the motivation was, as they pass on their genes, those genes shape our behavior. So basically, the males in our distant past who were very, very driven and had lots of children, we tend to have those drives in us. And the women who chose carefully their mates, a man who would help protect and provide and so on, that's what drives our basic attitudes today. However, bear in mind that those attitudes, our genes, are not deterministic. They respond to the environment. So the modern environment will change our behavior as compared to how we behaved in the primitive environment. Now, our brains are basically pattern-finding machines. We try to find patterns in everything, and this is really one of the bases of religious belief. In one experiment I read about where atheists and believers were shown certain words and certain images on a screen very rapidly, so rapidly that you're barely able to perceive it. So they really perceived it at a kind of unconscious level. And it was interesting because there were 2 different results for the atheist believers. The believers tended to see a pattern when there wasn't one, and the atheists didn't see a pattern when there was one. Now, This explains why the majority of people nowadays tend to be believers of one or the other, because religion is common to all societies, and most people are believers in some sort of God, some sort of supernatural being, and so on. And if you go back to the African savannah where we evolved, you can see why seeing a pattern where there isn't one would be more advantageous to survival than not seeing a pattern when there is one, because really and truly, the branch shakes, the bush shakes, and there's a saber-tooth tiger behind it. And if you say, okay, that's nothing, well, you're dead, you don't pass on your genes, right? But if there isn't a saber-tooth tiger and you think that when you run away, well, okay, you survive and you get a little fit. So that is why, because of that pattern finding, that you find that people tend to be believers. Now, this applies even to the lower animals with less complex brains than ours. Some of you may have heard of the psychologist B.F. Skinner, founded a now discredited school of psychology called behaviorism. And one interesting experiment he did was he had something called a Skinner box where he put pigeons and some other animals in, but mainly pigeons, to see how they'd react to various stimuli. And one of the usual experiments, okay, pigeon presses a button, gets food, and so on. One variation experiment Skinner did was these pigeons just got food randomly. In other words, it wasn't that the pigeons would learn the pattern when they pressed the button to get food, when there was a pattern. Then he changed it so that they pressed the button, they didn't get food, they pressed it something, they get food. And what he found, the pigeons started indulging in what he calls superstitious behavior. They would circle round and round or turn their head sideways. You know, whatever ritual they did to get food before, they reproduced it even though it was totally random. And that kind of attitude, again, is pattern finding. So if it's so for pigeons, imagine how much more so it is for us, who have far more complex brains and can find patterns much more easily. So we see this in children in a phenomenon a psychologist named American psychologist Deborah Kellerman, called promiscuous teleology, which is not as rude as it sounds. And basically, children, about 4 years old and so on, around that age, 4 to 6, find it's acceptable to ask, what is that for? For everything. That's the basic question of purpose. What is that for? So they ask it for not just clocks and our hands, you know, which obviously the clock is an artifact, the hand, you know, we obviously the hands is for something and clocks are for something, but they ask it for clouds and tigers. What are clouds for, mommy? Right? And how are you going to answer that? So that's what they call promiscuous teleology, a purpose and everything. Of course, as we get older, we don't ask such ridiculous questions. We ask more ridiculous questions. Now, a psychologist, Margaret Evans, she found that the children of Christian fundamentalists and evolutionists were equally likely to invoke the God explanation, should things come, about where things come from. Okay? So in other words, it didn't matter who your parents were and what your predilection was. Once you're a child, you're promiscuously teleological. And I said that nicely, didn't I? Now, so children, they really make no distinction between God and Santa Claus, right? Both of them are friends. And God has the same qualities as their best friends when you question them. Interestingly, autistic children, and remember, autism is a condition where you don't perceive other people's emotions. You don't perceive other people as people, you perceive them as objects. And autistic children tend to be atheistic because religion is a social function. It requires understanding that minds exist outside of your own mind. And Michael Persinger, another psychologist, did a very interesting experiment. He attached electromagnets to people's heads to stimulate certain parts of the brains and was able to induce in the temporal lobe, people feeling an invisible presence, having out-of-body experiences, and religious feelings. So religion clearly is sited in our brains, apparently in the temporal lobe. What all this means is that we tend to create our own whys, our own sense of purpose. We tend to find patterns in everything. There's a phenomenon in the Pacific Island called the cargo cults, where these islanders used to believe in phantom canoes delivering goods. When World War II happened and they saw airplanes, they used to believe in airplanes, and they actually set up a whole airstrip with a bamboo hut and a fake pilot with a bamboo beacon tower and an airstrip that they manned for 24 hours by pilots wearing fake uniforms, because these planes used to pass and drop goods. And so in other words, they created a whole new religion just out of seeing planes during World War II. And their basic concept that powerful beings would come and rescue them, well, give them supplies and rescue them from oppression, is something that's common to many, many societies. The latest, most modern manifestation of that is, of course, Scientology, where I think people from other planets are supposed to come back and, well, we'll all be good and perfect and so on. So, all this leads to the conclusion that we create our own whys, and that those whys are rooted in our biology and our evolutionary history. So, in purpose, 3 categories already dealt with by some of the other speakers. First, some people believe God has a purpose for us. Some believe the universe exists for a purpose. And some believe that existence has no purpose. And the cosmological perspective proposes that the universe itself exists for some ultimate purpose, which humans can find fulfillment by understanding that purpose and trying to match it and live according to it. Scientifically, there's no evidence of any such purpose, and the argument that we just can't understand what that purpose is means logically we shouldn't bother with it. The theological perspective proposes, in simple terms, a benevolent God, which is our purpose to serve. That is the perspective, again, by most of the other panelists, by all of the other panelists. And again, from my perspective, there's no evidence that such a being exists, and if it does, the evidence, such as the deaths of children, suggests that the being is malevolent, even if just by inaction. So, as I started by saying, the purpose of life is to, in simple terms, eat and have sex. And because we have such complex brains, we have developed complex strategies to eat and get sex. From the evolutionary perspective, you could say that human beings do many activities which are not centered around survival and reproduction. We have art, we have charity, and all kinds of things which appear not to be tied up with evolution. And all that is true, but it's not as true as you might think. The creation of works of arts, as examples of self-sacrifice and celibacy, are often rooted in the protection of kin, our relatives, or in our group, whether our group is defined by ethnicity, by class, by politics, by tribe, and so on. So, in any case, individuals can choose to defy these evolutionary patterns. We are not tied by our genes, but as a general truth, most human beings tend to fit those patterns of behavior. In fact, that's why in all different kinds of cultures, you see basically the same patterns, no matter what kind of cultures they are. And in fact, the irony is that religious believers tend to be more influenced by evolutionary drives than non-believers in many ways. That's why, for example, they're so appalled at things like homosexuality and abortion because these seem to interfere with reproduction and so on. And the basic reason that there are more Muslims in the world right now, there are so many Muslims, is not because of conversion, because they're out reproducing the other groups. So, if there is no supreme being, or if the universe is without purpose, the existentialist view, the existence has no purpose, says that life therefore has no purpose. This does not logically follow. If the universe has no purpose, if it's merely a physical, material, mechanical thing, it does not follow that I and human beings should have no purpose, because we can, to some extent, create our own purpose. We are limited because questions of free will and so on arise in that. But basically, human beings are social organisms. Religion is a very social activity, and the purpose we find comes from our social interaction to a great extent. So, if life is what we can make it, we have some basic things that give us really, even if you say that it's God or this or that, it really boils down to some basic things. Family, friends, work making a difference in the world for those of us who are driven. So, to our family, friends, and friends, work that you like, and activities that make some small difference in the world, these are my whys, my sense of what provided my sense of purpose, and in these whys, I am well pleased.
Thank you very much, Kevin. Absolutely no chance of me trying to encapsulate the presentations. So what I'm going to do is to give the presenters another opportunity to come back here, given what they have heard and given some of the thoughts that they ought to have presented in the first instance. And we're going to go in the same order, and hopefully our presentations will be limited to 3 minutes. So I'm going to ask Dr. Richard to come back and speak with us.
So many articulate people and so many fine communicators, and thank you so much, fellow panelists. The real issue is a personal purpose. And to the atheistic worldview, we ask for the rational justification of what has just been presented. There is no rational justification for it. There is biological and scientific justification in terms of observations, but not philosophically. You may have heard of the teacher who asked her student, what are the products of the West Indies? And the student looked at her and says, no, I do not know, madam. And she says, of course you do know. Where does sugar come from? And the student said, we borrow it from our neighbor. I think the atheistic worldview borrows much of what has been said from their theistic neighbors, not giving enough distinction between animals and humans. There are about 30 distinctions which cannot be answered by atheism, including abstract thought and accumulated knowledge and historical awareness. If you came with me to Albania, a trip that I just canceled yesterday, I was supposed to be there 2 weeks from now, the only officially declared atheistic worldview for about 50 years. And you find bunkers all over the place because they fed a lie that the West was going to attack them. And nobody really wanted to go after the Albanians. In terms of the Hindu worldview, I have to ask for moral justification. Why is doing right? Inside the pantheistic monistic framework, there is no really moral justification for it. So when 2 weekends ago, when Sachin Tendulkar overwhelmed the entire 30,000 people in the stadium and said to the umpire, I am out, even though the umpire called him not out, put his cricket bat under his shoulder and went back. And everybody was sitting stunned. We could say it was his karma which caused him, but then you wouldn't have applauded for him. The question is, again, in altruism, what keeps me from doing right for right's sake, or how do I know I'm just doing it for my own selfish interest? There's a wonderful Vedic prayer which says, lead me from untruth to truth, from darkness to light, from death to life. The Lord Jesus says, I am the truth, I am the way, I am the light. To the Islamic worldview, we ask for a personal justification of personal purpose. Because God sits in his heavens and he pontificates for the human race. But he is not metaphysically free. And in the Lord Jesus Christ, God is metaphysically free, great enough to love humanity, great enough to enter humanity, great enough to rescue humanity, great enough to take your burden and your sins on him, and great enough to come down to say, I will rescue you. So, the Christian purpose is to enjoy God in your personal relationship with him through the Lord Jesus Christ, who gives you eternal life forever, and you can know now that you have eternal life. You don't have to hope for it, you don't have to bribe God for it or manipulate God. And you can have abundant life right now. It all hinges around the resurrection of the Lord Jesus, the only self-resurrection in history, which if indeed he did not, I would be a Buddhist instead. At the end of last year, there were 33 miners caught in Chile. inside a 600-meter trap, 600 meters below, in an apartment complex-sized trap. They sent messages to see if anybody would rescue them. And in these worldviews, we can find a means by which their answers would affirm or show or disappoint and discourage the Chilean miners. The atheist worldview will say, just make the best out of it. The Hindu worldview will say, you've got to transcend consciousness. Let's be a spirit over matter. The Islamic worldview will say, I will give you prescriptions as to how many times you should pray to me. But the Christian worldview says, I'll send a Phoenix rescue capsule. There's enough room for everybody. As much time as you need. As you depend on me, I'll take you through and give you new life. And I would ask my fellow panelists as to how they would answer the Chilean rescue miner story if applied spiritually. My time is up. I know we have some questions, but I would like to welcome you to our website, just rameshrichard.com, for additional dialogue, not debate, but discovery. And I would love to keep in touch with you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. 5 minutes.
That's very gracious. What did Kevin do to you? Thanks. Islam believes in evidence-based stuff as well. But the reference of authority for us is in fact the Quran. I give you one example, and I could give you several more examples that the Quran has some stuff that in fact corroborates with in fact modern science, which they've only been able to find in the last 60 years with electron microscopes and the last 100 years geological stuff, but this is not the forum for that. But for the Muslim, and even for the non-Muslim, the Quran is in fact the reference source. And it tells us that we should dialogue, as Professor Ramesh is saying, dialogue with each other. The Arabic is ud'u ila sabili rabbika bil hikmah wal maw'idatil hasana, meaning we speak and we talk and we come to common terms and we talk in the ways that are nice, and we encourage people. And I think this is what things like these are supposed to be able to do. But a couple of quick points. One is that Islam doesn't believe that human beings are here because of a punishment, meaning that Adam and Eve did something and therefore they have been banished to earth and therefore it was a punishment. We don't believe it's part of a punishment. I did give you one scripture from the Quran that says it was part of God's plan from the beginning to be able to populate the earth, not necessarily debris from a cataclysmic explosion many years ago, but it was part of his plan. The interesting thing is that when Kevin said that making a difference is in fact part of humanism, that's interesting, eh? What does making a difference mean to you and to you and to you and to you and to another humanist organization elsewhere and to another humanist organization elsewhere, or even another group who don't even belong to anything else? Making a difference means something else. For some people, making a difference is shooting people, you know. Seriously. For some people, making a difference, it's different in your mind than somebody else's mind. So with respect to the humanists, they don't really stand for anything. As a matter of fact, it varies so much so that in the world, humanist organizations are referred to as one conservative, libertarian, progressive, socialist, apolitical, pro-gay, anti-war, and anti-war means sometimes anti-Muslim, thus sometimes pro-war. You take your pick. The point I'm making is that the same terminology means something different to different people. As far as Islam is concerned, and I guess most of the established religions, it gives a sense of purpose. It gives some guidelines for living. So we know adultery is wrong. We know shooting somebody is wrong. We know fraud is wrong. But if it is we don't have any established religion to give us those kinds of guidelines, it means, you know what? Anything goes. And listen to this statement. If you don't know where you want to go, who could finish it for me? Any road will take you there. I want to say that again. If you don't know where you want to go or where you're going, then any road will take you there, And a cosmologist, an embryologist, a humanist, a Christian, everyone will have their perspective. It's important we dialogue, and people are free to take a position that they want. But it's important that we dialogue in a way that, in fact, will bring some humaneness to the discussions rather than being extremely adversarial. Because I agree with Kevin, we have to live here. We all belong here. And I feel Trinidad and the world is as Muslim as it is Christian and as it is Hindu. I have a right here just like one of you. But I also have a right to what I believe, and you have a right to what you believe. It's important that we tolerate each other. It's important that we respect each other. And if people want to be able to accept somebody else's way of life, by all means. So Kevin said we are overpopulating the world, right? In truth and in fact, some countries, but the statistics doesn't support what Kevin is saying. Because the statistics show in the western part of the world, I'm talking United States, I'm talking Canada, I'm talking England, University of Glasgow study. Just recently, the sister of Sherry Blair became Muslim. Lauren Booth is her name. This is Tony Blair's sister-in-law. We have BBC journalists becoming Muslim. And I could tell you several other people and so on. But do we have to be able to say, because of that, Islam is good? No, they don't have to. I'm saying I presented some evidence, and there's some similarities between Christianity and Islam and Judaism. And as Allah tells us in the Quran, establish that which is common between you. Let's talk, and then we could probably negotiate differences, but we all belong right here, and there should be a certain level of respect that we must be able to have for each other. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Tiwari.
I did, in my presentation, touch on the notion of religion versus spirituality. And religion, as Kevin put it, is a social coming together, people with common beliefs, common traditions, common rituals. But spirituality is an individual thing. Spirituality allows us to make those choices that will get us up by the things we do, by the way we uplift while we uplift others. And therefore, Hinduism is not really described as a religion, it's a way of life. And there is a divinity within us that we all know what is right and what is wrong. I don't think any of us here, now it may vary, but we all know when we are making a choice that something is right or something is wrong. Because we hide and do the things that we want to say is right and we know it's wrong. If the basic teaching of Hinduism is that we recognize the divinity within us and we reconnect with that divine force, source, whatever it is, then that is our purpose. Religions for Peace, to which I belong, is an organization that respects, that advocates that we share the common values in each of our religion. We keep our identity, but we move forward with those shared common values for the same purpose that we're here tonight, to dialogue, to build up not tolerance, but respect for each other, because we should have the freedom to practice and live our lives as we so choose. Thank you.
Thank you, Kevin.
I'll just correct some of the more egregious errors I heard. First, I thought I did a pretty good job of giving a rational justification of purpose. From my perspective, Dr. Richard's thing is an irrational justification of purpose, which is fine once you have a sense of purpose, but certainly irrational in the sense it can't be proved. In his initial presentation, he said, well, Jesus Christ came down, so we won't be, what was the phrase? Hopeless and bored. So apparently human beings for 98,000 years were hopeless and bored. Good thing he came along and now we're all entertained. For Imam Ali Muhammad, let me correct some figures first in case any science students here might be led astray. It's not 14 4 million years ago. The universe began 14 billion years ago, and life on Earth about 3.5 billion years ago, just to be clear. As far as humanists being diverse, that is true. A range of views, but the basic principles tend to be common. A reliance on evidence, reliance on ethics, reliance on compassion in terms of your views, in terms of shaping policy, and so on. And Muslims have a range of views too, which is why some of them strap on bombs and blow themselves up on other people, and some say that is wrong. So, and as far as underpinning goes, right here in Trinidad, in jail, all religions are overrepresented except 2. And all categories overrepresented except 3. In other words, we have 26% Roman Catholics and 30-something% Catholics in jail. We have 6% Muslims and 10% Muslims in jail. The only 2 categories that are underrepresented are Hindus and Presbyterians, and there are no atheists in jail.
Thank you very much, Kevin. We're going to go into the question period now, but there are 4 pre-selected questioners, and they comprise people who have functioned on previous panels, and 2 others who have been pre-selected. We're going to start with a question from Joseph Caterson. And the question can be directed to anyone or any one or more persons on the panel.
Thank you, gentlemen and lady, for your presentations. My question is directed to Kevin on the humanistic perspective, in that for me the question of purpose of life kind of ties in to the question of ultimate hope. Where are we going? And what I would like to ask is that what does humanism has to say about our ultimate destiny, and as individuals, as ultimate destiny, the race as a whole? What does humanism have to say for that?
Just for purposes of disclosure, Joe Caterson was our Christian participant on the panel last year.
Humanism has basically nothing to say about ultimate destiny, because the basic perspective of humanism is that there are problems in the world, and if they deal with the problems with the tools of the world, not with supernatural means. So, as I said in my presentation, basically everybody has to decide what their own purpose is. For me personally, since I don't believe in an afterlife, I try to do the best and the most that I can while I'm here.
Okay, thank you for that response, Kevin. We have a question from Christopher Starr, who represents... Now, Chris, we are recording, so it would be good if you use a microphone.
No, I don't think I need a microphone, but if you think I do, I will.
Now, we're recording through the sound system.
Kevin Baldeo saying, I didn't have my spectacles on when you told us that there was nobody up there giving us a purpose and telling us what to do, so I'm not sure whether you did so with a straight face. Please tell us that you did not. This appalling idea that there's nobody there telling us what to do, telling us what our purpose is. This appalling idea that human beings are on our own. I mean, that's just too scary. Please tell us you were joking.
And I'm sure the audience won't mind getting a response from everyone on the panel to that assertion by Chris. So Kevin, when you're finished, you can pass the mic around.
No, well, Chris was, I'm sorry, your applause was wasted. He was actually being very sarcastic. So, yeah, and that's one of the reasons people tend to turn to religion, because it's such a scary idea that there's nothing, no ultimate purpose, and nobody telling us what to do, that we can actually decide within the limits of our capacities to decide for ourselves what our purpose is.
Basically, I've said the same, that although I believe in a divine force or source, I determine, and I think each of us have our own purpose in life. And that really is an individual choice guided by some up there.
No comment really, except to say I agree. It's appalling, right? So I share your view.
I would like to address both Dr. Starr. I watched you on that first debate, and Kevin this evening. On the first debate and this evening's answer, I think both of them have committed what I call the genetic fallacy or the psychogenetic fallacy, which means that religion is chosen because of fear or having to need a purpose. And the genetic and the psychogenetic fallacy says just because you can point to a fallacy, there is justification of belief. We need justification of belief, not just opinions. And the historical setting in which the Christian worldview is put together is not just magic. It is mystery, but it's not magic. I also think there's a bunch of ad hominem there to the man in terms of the sarcasm and the scariness of it. But in the psychogenetic fallacy, there is where the arguer has priority. The arguer has priority, so they have priority. However, they're not willing to wait in ambiguity, both in terms of time as well as information. The question is, will there be some future justification of what is indeed the case right now? Also, I would like to suggest that the rational justification means it's not just an opinion, it has to be a position. It has to be a credible position. It has to be based on situations in science and nature which are not premised on non-scientific and unscientific philosophical assumptions. So, sorry, but you've committed the psychogenetic fallacy.
Okay, we have a question from Professor Ashok Sahai. I'm dealing with some awful penmanship, so I apologize if your name is pronounced wrong.
Thank you, Mr. Chairperson. Thank you, panelists, for nice speeches. My dear ladies and my dear gentlemen, very good evening. In fact, why I'm here? Okay, I belong to India, and not very far from Delhi, I was professor at University of Roorkee, which is one of the IITs. In fact, I was denied pension after 35 years of my services. That is why I am here. I am earning my pension. Well, God has a purpose, Mr. Humanist said, and that is the purpose God had, that I should not only teach Indian students, ladies and gentlemen, I should do that with Trinidadians also. And my purpose as such, personally, is to not only earn the knowledge, but disseminate it before I am dead. Because I am sure there is death after life. I am not so sure about life after death.
Okay, do you have a question for the panel?
I have a question for all of them.
Which is?
Therefore, first question will be, is it that purposely God caused the denial of pension so that I be here?
Okay.
And in fact, the last speaker first, you said there are theists, there are atheists. I'll briefly mention, I'm fond of reading. A very great Nobel laureate, turned philosopher into later part of the life, wrote, in this whole world, there is none theist, none atheist. We are all agnostics. Only the degree of belief or that of disbelief equivalently varies from person to person and for the same person from time to time. So it is probabilistic and stochastic. So don't say that there is theist and don't say there is atheist. I personally believe. Maybe you disagree. That is the other question.
Thank
The
you
other
very much, Professor. What we want to do is to broaden the questions from the other members of the audience. So let's deal with your pension issue. I don't see Mr. Watson Duke in the audience, so I'm not sure how adequately that. But
Okay.
I suspect that what you're dealing
Agree.
with.
I should be more brief. But I have a question for Mr. Ramesh also. You said pleasure, enjoyment means absence of pain. I am very fond of pepper and I find pleasure because scientifically it has been established that pepper accelerates and stimulates the pleasure centers. In fact, sex with some pain is better than sex without pain.
Okay, thank you very
And
much,
Y equal to
Professor.
FX.
Professor, no, I think we really need to go on now. I think the initial question, but I think he hit a very important nail on the head. And I suppose what he was trying to do was to invoke the fate versus destiny question, and perhaps that's the direction that was. So who would like to venture a response to his concern?
To the pension question. If there's a malevolent God, yes, he did it.
Anyone else who cares to respond?
Check the Ministry of Education in India. They probably did something, but the Islamic view on these things is this. Yes, there is something called qadr or predestination, that God decides certain things. However, God gives us what is called a freedom of choice, and we use the freedom of choice to make certain decisions in our lives. We sometimes don't know what the predestination is, but God knows. Sitting down and say, I'm going to sit here and see what God decides, is something called fatalism. Fatalism. I could sit here and say, food. I ain't going to get no food. I have to get up and I have to go. The Islamic worldview is that if we make the effort to do something, then God helps us in that process. And this is in fact the Islamic view. So in terms of pension, I'm really sorry. I hope Trinidad treats you very nicely.
I do know the Indian system rather well because I have been victimized by the kinds of situations that you have been talking about, Professor. The question is if there's a God who you said caused this pension laws, or is it just karmic principle? And if you don't have a God, then there's no explanation for it except being victimized by karma. That this is what you deserve, you got it, you must have done something bad in the last life, therefore you got it now. But on the matter of sex, maybe there's not so much karma. It is amazing that you're still thinking of sex during pension years. That is an amazing thing. On the issue, however, of pleasure as one of the purposes of life, that was not my position, but that is the position of what we call Epicureanism. Epicureanism said, as a Greek philosopher said, is the absence of pain in the body and the absence of trouble in the soul. It is closely connected with hedonism which says that sex and other bodily pleasures are the reasons which we live, somewhat like our atheist worldview mentioned. But there's what we call the boredom of hedonism. That is, after you attain whatever your pleasure point is, you're saying, this is all there is? I mean, you say, this is all the boredom is. So you need to go in what is called the law of diminishing returns, so you're continuously compensating, and it becomes an impossible journey. So your comments are well taken, they are connected, it comes from deep pain, and I trust that there will be some good personal explanation for being in Trinidad for you. And I hope that my explanation would be of use and help to you.
Thank you. Is Haidar Ali in the audience? Oh, he's not. Okay, we're going to open the floor for questions now. Simply raise your hand. There's a roving microphone. So we take this gentleman. Let's yet recognize two other people. You've already asked your questions. Young guy in the black, anybody else? And the gentleman with the headband. Oh. Okay.
Good afternoon, panelists. The question is for Mr. Balo Singh. There was 3 ants in a dark room sitting on an elephant. One ant was sitting on the tusk, and he said that this elephant is cold and smooth and hard. There was an ant sitting on the trunk, and he said that this elephant is soft and pliable. And the third ant was sitting on the elephant's back, and he said that this elephant is firm and rubbery. Now, from a logical perspective, which one of these ants is correct? And I'm asking this question in context of that this Earth is a speck in terms of the size of the universe. And Mr. Balayo Singh is even less than a speck on the face of this universe. So from a logical perspective, how can you make an assessment of the purpose of life when you haven't investigated even a speck of the universe?
Thank you for that question. Lindsay, while the panel is preparing, there's the gentleman in black in the back. Yes, you can give him the microphone, and Kevin, you can probably get the ball rolling on that question. No, Kevin?
Okay. Actually, one of the scientific facts in the Quran is that ants talk, which will give you some idea of the science of the Quran. But your assumption of that story you gave, that example, is that human beings don't have limits on their knowledge. We have limits on our knowledge. We can't know if there's some ultimate purpose to the universe because we just simply can't investigate that, right? What we do know is that given how life is, how we understand how life came to be and how we evolved, we can say that certain things are highly improbable. It is highly improbable that the universe has a consciousness. The idea of a supreme being who is benevolent and omnipotent is highly improbable. So, I gave a list there of the things that we know give us a sense of purpose. And within the limits of our knowledge,
It's actually a powerful question. There's what we call the probability continuum, and just because we have a pink does not mean there's no white or red. And I think the balanced coverage which comes from a journalistic mindset has gotten our atheistic worldview into a problem. When we say the sun rises in the east, and some say the sun rises in the west, we say, well, to take a balanced coverage, it means that the sun doesn't rise in the east or the west. And your push of the question is very, very appropriate. I know that there's beyond reasonable doubt, but there cannot be beyond unreasonable skepticism. And beyond reasonable doubt, we can establish from a variety of factors, and we're now going into different issues and the purpose of life, that there is God who reveals his purpose to the human race.
Thank you. The young gentleman in the back.
All right, I'm going to give you a situation here. A kid looks at a jellyfish and asks his father, what is it? It's a jellyfish. His father said, what's its purpose? Father couldn't answer. So he asks, now, what's that? Pointing to a cloud. Says a cloud. Same thing, asks its purpose. And another one, a watermelon. Now, a watermelon is 98% water, a cloud is 98% water, and a jellyfish is 98% water. Now, they're quite distinct. So, if the father were to say, okay, the jellyfish could determine whatever purpose it wants, the cloud could determine whatever purpose it wants, and the watermelon determine whatever purpose it wants, would that be right? Would it be reasonable for the kid to eat the jellyfish? Anyway, the fact is that for us to say that complex beings as ourselves could just appear here by accident and just determine our own purpose wouldn't be right to say. Secondly, you said that, it's Kevin, was it? That the atheist view, you have no, they don't really believe in like an ultimate end, afterlife, and so on. But then you really, in a sense, you have no initial beginning, because the area of, how can you say that the universe started by a cataclysmic explosion? Where did the material get there to begin with, to cause the explosion? You see, there's a big gap there, and it's not, by science, it's not logical for you to continue along that belief with that big gap at the beginning.
Okay, thank you very much. We're going to stop there. Kevin, the question of where did all of this come from in the first place if the Big Bang did occur?
All right, let me deal with the other question first, the other comment that we came here by accident. I never said we came here by accident. There are sound scientific grounds in terms of evolution, which Dr. Stark could inform you about, as to how we evolved as organisms. And while the questions of the beginning of life itself are still speculative, the first cells and so on, not cells, but the first structured organisms, structured life here. That's up for grabs still. However, we know how we evolved as organisms. That's one. So it's not by accident. It's through natural selection, mutation, and so on. Secondly, the question of the universe beginning, again, you see, the problem is that time also began with the Big Bang. So it is meaningless to talk about before and after. And we get caught up in language problems and the limits, again, of our knowledge and how we can talk about these things. There is no before the Big Bang because time and space began there. So, in a sense, you could say that the universe always was, not in its present form, but in some form.
Okay, anyone else want to have a go at that? Imam? No? Okay, there's another question. Now, just so I will be fair to people who we are going to take the young lady there, but the gentleman with the headwear at the back there, then the gentleman with the glasses there, and that gentleman with his left hand up in the back.
Yeah. One correction. There was actually no Big Bang since there was no oxygen before the universe was whatever. There was actually not a Big Bang. So, one clarification. In addressing the issue of, so when it comes to all of the theists on the panel who have this idea of free will and choice, it seems to be contradictory in the sense that from Catholicism to all of the religious sects, from the Protestant Reformation even to Islam, that the means by which you are or you become elect is not necessarily based on your actions or behavior. So to say, well, God is omnipotent, but you choose God, shows a means of arrogance, or even it's a contradictory in that sense. And when it comes to the notion of generally that, the existentialist belief that there is no purpose, I think that in itself creates a great leverage that we all have as human beings in that there is no intrinsic purpose, but now we have the ability to create, meaning and purpose from that lack of the intrinsic value of meaning. So that in itself, as I think Baldissing is saying, that very nature of not having an intrinsic, innate means for saying this is what life is for creates all of the possibilities that we all experience. So,
thank you. Responses from the panel?
Thank you. This may be a surprise to you, but I do agree with what Mr. Baldissing said in terms of time and the Big Bang. There was no such thing as time. In fact, you can't speak of time before the Big Bang, and one of the problems is being purely human is that you have to use past tense in order to speak about time before the Big Bang. What would distinguish the theistic worldview from the atheistic worldview, as a friend says, if there was a Big Bang, there had to be a Big Banger. Now comes, I need to also mention something about our Hinduistic worldview in terms of the question that's just been posed. In traditional Hinduism, there are actually 6 schools of Hinduistic philosophy. All of them are rather sophisticated. And just like there is the Calvinistic and Armenian dialogue, which is what you're referring to in your question, sir, in Hinduism we have a very sophisticated analogy called the cat school and the monkey school of salvation. How does a monkey carry its young versus how a cat carries its young? A cat carries its young by its neck, but a monkey carries its young, and the young embraces the monkey. This is an issue only if you start ascribing time issues to election and predestination and so on. And Muslim scholars, there's lots of work, Kalam, cosmological arguments in terms of how all this works. I would suggest a book by Alvin Plantinga called God, Freedom, and Evil. It's been fully addressed to the best of human capacity, in my opinion, where it's not God knows all that is going to happen, but God does not know what would not happen, which means as a counterfactual. I also would like to suggest to you that in a free will theodicy, it is a simultaneous causality because time does not apply to God in its eternity. It's a simple system. It is not a complex being, he's a simple being. So those are some ways in which we take off the edge of the paradox.
After death, the simple answer is nothing happens. We return to the atoms of the universe, and we return because the universe never loses energy. So that's the short and brief answer that I can give you. As I said before, the purpose of life has to be done within life. And in fact, the belief that we persist in some form after death often gives people an excuse to commit great evils.
The Hindu view of death is that the soul sheds the body and the soul moves on until we have evolved to the stage where we can reunite with that divine soul from which we came.
The Islamic worldview is that man is made up of body and soul. And there is nourishment for both. One is spiritual, one is physical. And that when death comes, the physical body is placed in the grave or cremated. The soul, as far as Islam is concerned, the Islamic belief, based on the patterns that Kevin talked about, and yes, there are patterns in almost any ideology. The Islamic belief is that the soul is in fact taken and will be judged on a day of judgment by God based on what we did here. And one of the two places will be our final abode, and then it will be time of eternity. One of them will be a place of paradise, beauty and wonder and bliss, and a place of ignominy and gloom, which is going to be the fire of hell. This is in fact the Islamic position.
I've treated this subject on YouTube, on Life After Death. There are basically three positions. The first is you go nowhere, which is the atheistic worldview. The second position is the Hinduistic and the Buddhistic worldview, and because of reincarnation or karma, that you come back here in some form in the constituents of reality, depending on how you performed in the previous life. The only thing is I've not met a single person who's trying to come back. They all want to escape the next world. The theistic worldview is that there is heaven and hell. And what distinguishes the Christian and the Islamic worldview is that the Lord Jesus came in order to assure you right now that you can have eternal life. In the only self-resurrection in all history is I give you life, you believe on me, and you will have life, both abundant life and eternal life forever. So these are the general patterns that we find. And it's really a question of who can return back from life in this life and give you promise and assurance of the future. And that's where the resurrection of the Lord Jesus shines, and otherwise, as I said, I would be something else.
Okay, gentleman in the black.
Just like to say thank you very much, panelists, for wonderful discussions that you all had. To Dr. Ramesh, we've definitely been wowed by your intelligence. Really, really thank you so much for that. To Imam, I felt that you really, truly answered the question probably a lot better than anyone else, because I really wanted to find out what everyone had to say. What is our purpose? And you couldn't say it better than obey God. To Dr. Tiwari, I just want to say that I've been basically preaching ever since I was 4 years old. I'm a Pentecostal minister, and I've always found that in times when I feel like I don't know what is the true purpose of life, the closer I get to God, those questions just completely disappear. To
Kevin Baldwin.
Kevin, I just want to say that the view on Scientology is a little bit different, because in Scientology, they don't believe that anybody is going to come back or anything like that. Just we have that power, we have that ability. But the question I would like to propose to you is, after you die, you find yourself standing in front of this person that you heard about being God, and he begins to question you about, why didn't you believe in me? What would your answer be? If after you die, you stand before God, how are you going to deal with that? And what exactly would your answer, and basically how would you interact with him?
Thank you. Kevin, I think the question, you're popular here this evening.
I'd say you should have given more evidence. And what a dumb world you created.
Anyone? Yes?
And to Kevin, I would say, like Dr. Carl Sagan said, the absence of evidence is not evidence of absence.
The lady at the back in the gray. The lady at the back in the gray, and then we're going to have the final question from in front here. Because we can go on all night or into early tomorrow morning. I think that people, somebody spoke about having to go to Port of Spain through Blanchisseuse. Let's keep that in mind. The lady, yes.
Hi, good night, everybody. My question to the three religious people is that all things that exist on earth, we could prove where it come from. We could prove how humans come, how it have volcanoes, storm, everything. How do we prove that God exists?
Thank you for
What
that.
have He done that we cannot prove came through nature or some other way?
I think this was the question, sorry. Wasn't this the question in the first debate? And I think you should go watch that debate. And there's a good counter going back and forth between Dr. Starr and Dr. Caterson. And again, the absence of evidence is not the evidence of absence. You can't prove with mathematical certainty, but you can prove with philosophical certitude that God exists. And there's a lot of material, and really there's no question that you could actually ask that has not been asked before and address. So, to echo a sign that I saw in a shop, if you don't change direction, you'll end up where you're going. I ask you to seriously think about changing direction in your life. A second comment, if nobody comes down to rescue you, you'll be stuck forever. And the Christian view of the purpose of life is that you can enjoy a personal relationship with God through the Lord Jesus Christ, starting right now, and you can be assured of life forever. If you want a purpose to live for, a pattern to live by, and a power to live in, I ask that you consider this particular case. I want to thank my esteemed panelists who have been so articulate and friendly, and this is how a debate should be conducted. Debate, somebody said, is life. Everything else is preparation.
Thank you, Dr. Richard. A couple of quick points. For the 15 minutes I have. One.
14 are gone.
You counted like Kevin Boy. If you don't know where you want to go, no, serious now. If you don't know where you want to go, then any road will take you there, number one. Number two, if you keep doing things the same way, we'll get the same results. If we want different results, we have no choice but to do things differently. There's a name we have in Trinidad for people who do the same thing and expect different results. What's the answer? Mad people. The last point is that I think it was instructive tonight, and you heard some various worldviews, and I'm also making a call for you to investigate, search, read. I've made some notes already in terms of what does certain phrases Kevin used and Doc used. I'm going to actually go and check it out on my own. So read, investigate, and hopefully we'll be able to take a worldview that we're very comfortable with, and may God guide us in that search.
I don't know if it matters what name we call God by. I think what is more important is how we connect to that force. And therefore, my contention is, how do we achieve the end? What means do we use to achieve the end? And if the means is common among most of us here, then it doesn't matter. If our purpose is to connect and to evolve and to become better human beings, leave here better than we came, it doesn't matter what religion I belong to. And as I tell people who come to my gate to proselytize, I say, I'm a Hindu. Do you see my jhandis? I'm a practicing Hindu. Do you know anything of me? Have you read my scriptures? Or would you like me to read and have a conversation with you when you don't know mine, but you want me to. I know yours. So when you have read mine, we can have an equal conversation. And if I were to think of myself as being any other thing but a human being born in a Hindu home, then I think I will not be able to find my purpose. My purpose is different from, or maybe common to some other people, but we all have to find our own purpose with that guiding force lending us a hand. Thank you.
If you brought to me a survey of all the countries in the world which had just one indicator, the religiosity of that country, how many people are religious, I could predict for you the amount of violence, the amount of teenage births, the amount of out-of-wedlock births, the amount of corruption, and so on. The greater the religiosity, the higher those things. In the more secular countries, there is low crime, low violence, more stability, more prosperity, and so on. So, insofar as changing, we keep doing the same things and praying and preaching and so on, with thinking things will change. We need a different approach in terms of purpose. We need to apply, like I said, the humanist principles, ethics, rationality, compassion, and those, it seems to me, are the foundation of any good purpose in life.
Thank you very much, Kevin Baldev Singh. Thank you very much, panelists.